but ambulances were operating in that area as they came in. There was no warning at all. Just heard the whoosh of the jet engines, and then the strike of the bombs. 3 bombs in a row on exactly the same location.
David, it's Tim Marshall here. Tell me, do the Baghdad population, do the people have sufficient air raid shelters?
They have a huge number of, Tim, as you know, you've been here too, a huge number of public air raid shelters, but there's been an intense feeling here since the last Gulf War, 1991, that after the Al Amaria incident, where there were over 400 casualties in a public shelter, most of the people here fear to go into those because of what happened. 2 missile strikes into the shelter, and there were 400 dead as a result of that. So that is very much in their minds here at the moment. Most of the families I speak to shrug their shoulders and say, you know, they've got loads of children, 10 children, but they're not going into the bomb shelters. They're going into their homes. They're bunkering down. They've got some sort of bunkers from the Iran-Iraq war, most of them actually, so they just rehabilitated those and sheltering under those at night. Completely inadequate, of course, for the sort of ordnance that's being dropped on this city at the moment. The shrapnel, the hot metal, the explosions, the shattering glass. If they're caught in the open when this is going on, of course there are casualties, but terrifying for them tonight. As this attack continues, no all clear is sounded. I suspect we will not hear an all clear. The air raid siren went off once, and the Akak fire and explosions were already happening. So the air defences were caught by surprise. We just don't know what's happening, when it's going to happen, but a lot of fires burning, a lot of ambulances moving about in front of me.
And David, have many, if you're allowed to say this, have many people left the city in advance of this?
Sorry, Tim, you'll have to say that again. How many people?
I beg your pardon. If you're allowed to comment on this, if you feel it's okay, have many people left the city in the last few days?
No, it's been impossible for them. Most of them have decided to stay with their families, to stay with their relatives, to stay with their children. Where will they go? Who's going to look after them if they do leave the city? This is their home. This is where their family is. This is where the children went to school. They're trying to get on with their lives as best as they can, but under appalling conditions. And tonight they're tasting exactly what the Pentagon have called shock and awe. But they're not doing it in large public shelters. They're doing it in their own homes. They're perhaps many of them who haven't built shelters, perhaps in their basements or their cellars or under tables at the moment.
David, you were on air for most of the original fierce bombardment, but there was a time when your phone line was cut. And we were watching it here, and we took an editorial decision not to talk over the pictures, and we just sat here and watched for about 10 minutes. Our jaws were dropping open. It was awesome. But can you tell us the effect on you and our colleagues, Velko in Milan and Josh that are there? What was it like for you seeing that firsthand? Because even through a TV screen, David, even at this distance, it was shocking and awesome.
Yes, Tim. Because there's so much glass around.
We're listening to continuous live coverage from correspondent David Chater of our sister network Sky News, reporting from inside Baghdad, and we'll get more from him as the moments move forward. You heard a short time ago from the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who made clear what we had been reporting throughout the day, that what you see is one view from one eye, from one lens on one section of one city in a nation the size of the state of California. We see but a very small slice of this war life in Baghdad. And with that in mind, this bulletin just coming in a recent dispatch from the region. Airstrikes continue on the Iraqi capital. Aircraft are being heard over Baghdad for the first time, and there's a huge fire that rages to the south of the city. That's something we have not seen and possibly will not see, that is. There are other firefights going on in other cities, as well as a bombing happened in the northern part in Mosul. These are night scope visions which are coming to us out of the center of the city, and let's go back to David Chater and listen in now as our coverage continues.
Morning. Perhaps a few flashes and bursts of anti-aircraft fire, but it's keeping me on my toes, certainly, and the rest of my team.
I'm sure. And you probably know this from other sources, but the Americans are saying several hundred targets will be hit tonight, so I'm afraid you're probably in for more. It's what, 5 to 11? We did see pictures earlier of people on the streets. Is it now totally quiet?
Well, let me just pop my head up. On the banks of the Tigris, the lights are still on. On my side, there are no cars moving. On the far bank, there are no cars moving anymore. I can see the red flashing lights of ambulances, of course, especially after that last hit. But at the moment, I don't see anything else moving. Everyone is taking cover, taking shelter. No, I didn't know what you just told me, that there are going to be hundreds of targets hit. That means it's far from over, and the best thing is to try and stay safe and try and witness this and try and give you some sort of impression of what it's like for the civilians who are suffering this awesome bombardment.
Remind us of the population of Baghdad.
Well, between 4.5, 5 million, 6 million.
Of course, the idea behind this awesome bombardment, as David Chater describes it, and the civilians who are enduring it, the idea behind all of this is to free them from the regime which has oppressed them for so many years. And the great hope among Allied forces is that at a time in the not-too-distant future, they'll be able to hoist the flag yet again and live in freedom and be fed by the Allies and clothed by the Allies and given medicine by the Allies to go on with a life that probably will be a lot more pleasing. As we continue to watch the pictures over Baghdad, and reminding you that to the south of the city there is said to be an enormous fire raging. We're working to get some correspondents out of there, but that's coming from some of the reporters who are without cameras in the region, and when we get more information on that, we'll bring it to you. In the meantime, I want to go to the USS Constellation, where reporter Kevin Monahan is standing by, and he's been watching the developments from there. Kevin, I'm guessing the last few hours have been quite something to see.
It's been crazy, Shepard. It's been non-stop flight sorties off of the Constellation. We had to wait until some of the planes landed safely, of course. They have just done so. F-14s and F-18s arriving on the deck of the USS Constellation just a few minutes ago. The remaining are in the air, safely out of Iraqi airspace. Mainly, the targets we're hearing are Iraqi air defense, military installations, and leadership positions. This, as I said, has been a non-stop operation here. I'm sure it will continue. It will be a long night. It's been pretty business-like, Jeff. Very, very intense. 8 days, shock and awe, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely been in the air today. Everybody pretty much, it's been unspoken that it was going to take place. The pilots were visited by the Admiral earlier today. He pretty much told them that the time had come for them to be in harm's way tonight, and that you have, quote unquote, you've trained for this. Come home safely and make America proud.
Kevin Monahan, we certainly hope that they do. I hate to interrupt you and wish I didn't have to, but I need to update our viewers and let them know that the A-Day is upon us. The attack on Baghdad and Iraq has begun in order to liberate the Iraqi people. For Britt Hume in Washington, I'm Shepard Smith in New York. This is Fox News Channel continuing coverage of the campaign. We'll have continuous coverage on Fox News Channel on cable. Some of our Fox stations will now break away. It is now 3 o'clock in the east, noon in the west, midnight in Baghdad. Actually 11 p.m. in Baghdad as the Allied campaign continues. You are looking live through Nightscope vision over the city, where we can tell you that a number of targets have been hit. At least a dozen shots on the presidential palace, which sits on the banks of the Euphrates River. At least a number of other shots with 2,000-pound bombs have rained down across specific targets throughout the region. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, in his briefing this afternoon here in East Coast time, describing what had been pinpoint accuracy. Left in question now is who is in control of Iraqi forces. Unclear to us exactly with whom the Allied forces are communicating regarding any possible surrender, though we do know some lower-level folks have surrendered in the Iraqi military. It's unclear with whom they are negotiating for surrender, or not negotiating, but with whom they are speaking for surrender on behalf of the Iraqi military. It is unclear whether Saddam Hussein is able to give any commands now. Quite frankly, it's unclear whether Saddam Hussein is even alive. We know that on the first night, the Allied forces targeted a bunker in which 5 Iraqi senior leadership personnel were said to be entering. We know that that strike was successful. We know, according to the reporting of Fox News senior chief political correspondent Carl Cameron, that there has been no communications to speak of between Saddam Hussein or his sons and the rest of the Iraqi military. Take that as you will, and recognize that they do have some fiber lines there which might be more difficult to trace. However, some believe now that Saddam Hussein is at least wounded and may no longer be with us. I want to return now to the USS Constellation and Kevin Monahan, who is updating us on the progress there. Kevin, I know that they act every day on board as if every day is a war. The only difference is today they're packing munitions, and on other days they might not be. Kevin will update us on progress from the USS Constellation in just the next few minutes. But Britt, I guess we're in one of those lulls between one of those calms amid the storm.
What do you say?
Britt Hume in Washington.
Yes, Shep. Yeah, we're continuing to watch this scene unfold here, with the periodic explosions indicating further bombardment. I'm sitting here, as you know, with retired Air Force Generals Thomas McInerney and General Moore. General Burt Moore, and I'm struck by one thing. The resistance, even given the diminished state of the Iraqi air defenses, seems almost non-existent. General McInerney, to what do we owe that? What surface-to-air missiles? They're thought to have had some, at least. Any sense of what's going on here?
They had 63 surface-to-air missile sites. And, of course, 250 airplanes at 6 different bases, some as late as the MiG-29 and Foxbats.
This is what we believe they had as we started this campaign.
Yes, and we knew they had this. Now, the interesting thing is, so people don't think, well, this is just easy, is we have done those things that have prevented them from taking off. Number one, they know from last time that our radar is looking at those 6 bases, and as soon as they take off, we're going to have F-15s or F-16s or F-18s or F-14s on our CAP, which no one is hearing about.
CAP being the combat air patrols that are in the air all the time.
In the air all the time. There are a lot of things out there that we're not seeing, but is supporting these attacks, so they'll destroy them right away. And they obviously know that. And
so they don't go up because they can't afford to.
Well, their choice is if they take off, they might just as well as put a pistol in their mouth. They're going to die right away. Now, that's not easy. I mean, we have an incredible capability to do that, but we're absolutely dominant. The next area, which we thought that there would be much more of, is the surface-to-air missiles. We have suppressed them in many ways with bombs from stealth bombers and stealth fighters that they don't see coming in, that we've known where they were from satellites and other sources of information. So we're picking them off even before they have a chance. And they've done an incredible job doing that. So there's a lot of support work going out there, Britt. It's not easy, and we got to give those people a tremendous amount of credit for what they've done.
Now, what does it mean? This is what you call air supremacy, correct? Air superiority is when you're pretty much no resistance in the air. Air supremacy means you own the skies.
This is air dominance.
Air dominance. Is that something I didn't know about? I knew about air supremacy. I didn't know about air dominance.
Yeah, air supremacy means you have general control of the skies and you can pretty well do what you want to do. Air dominance means that there is no threat to you in the sky at all.
General Moore, this picture we're seeing is obviously night vision's camera.
Looks like some F-16s taken off.
That's a land base, right?
Yeah, land-based F-16s taken off.
And we would guess that that's clearly a land base, and presumably that's in somewhere like Kuwait, right?
Kuwait, down in Oman, down along the Persian Gulf Peninsula.
This is the kind of sight you would expect to see on a night when your Air Force is particularly active, not only in targeting with bombing, but with combat fighters like that would support your ground forces.
Exactly, and it's what, a little after 11 there. If they're on their way to Baghdad or to support something in Baghdad, we're talking about an hour or two up there and whatever they do while they're on patrol.
Would we fly combat fighter planes to escort jets, escort bombers, or is that not necessary?
Well, with the stealth B-2 and the F-117, they don't want a lot of they don't want any company with them. They do
because that company's visible even if they're not.
Exactly. So, but you have the AWACS, you have the J-STARS, you have other airborne elements with which they can communicate, and they understand that they are there and they can provide support as required.
Now, what you're suggesting to me is that those bombers can take care of themselves if it comes to a firefight in the air.
No, but their defense is stealth, and the idea is that they can go in relatively unseen. Now, nobody is invisible in the air. We've learned that, but relatively unseen, and they sneak back out using circuitous routes in and out to avoid defense.
And of course, as General McInerney said, they're not taking any airplane. They're not sending any airplanes up anyway.
And the Combat Air Patrol is covering all those large assets.
Now, would Saddam Hussein be likely, as I presume he did in the past, to not send them up, or would he order them up and the orders be ignored?
I'm sure that they've probably said they never got the order. The communications lines were cut. Whether they got the order or not, they're not that dumb, Britt. They know it's all over. And so I'm sure their commanders and that have just, cut the phone line and said it was cut and they can't get it. They're not going to fly.
Well, that gives us a sense of U.S. forces virtually unimpeded, able to carry out these operations. You heard the question asked at the briefing, which clearly perturbed Secretary Rumsfeld, of whether we would be looked at as a bully or not. It does seem that this is a mismatch, isn't it?
It's a mismatch. It always was a mismatch. We've been talking about it, and it's clearly going to be a short, decisive war. They do not want to say that. They're underbidding their bid, but I can assure you that this war will not go a week.
Now, you heard the reporting from David Chater of Sky News, who is in Baghdad. He'd been to a hospital. He spoke of children. He saw pitiable sights of children who he said had been injured in these attacks. There's no way to know with certainty how those children were injured, but we have had some experience with Baghdad and hospitalized alleged victims of our attacks in the past. What would be a wise way to view such reports?
Well, I would view them with great skepticism, and here's why. Having gone through the process that they go through, which is a very rigid process, on the 7,000 targets they had, on the 3,000 they're going to do in these early days.
You're talking about our commanders.
Our commanders. And they put a collateral damage ring around what, say, a 2,000-pound bomb or 5,000-pound bomb will do.
This is when they're drawing it up.
And they're drawing it up. And then they go through a rigorous study to see if there's hospitals around, if there are mosques around, if there are schools, if there's a residential area. And if they are, then they use a smaller bomb and then go through the same process. I will not say that you won't have an accident, Britt, and I'm sure that
we're bound to have some.
Bound to have some. And if that's what David saw, I'm not sure he did, because I don't think he's been to the hospital in the time frame. I don't think he's moving, so I don't know where he got that.
Well, there were some tours given yesterday.
Well, yesterday, but
since this was about, he was talking about what had happened on the first night.
Well, we virtually didn't do anything on the first night except against
what we thought was
the
a command
bunker. So maybe I'm not going to dispute with them, and I'm not going to say there aren't. But the fact is the objective is clearly to take this regime down and take it very quickly.
Now, there was General Moore, I'm sure you remember as well as anyone, having been so deeply involved in Desert Storm, the time when one of our bombs hit what we knew to have been a command bunker, only to find that the Iraqis that many civilians were there using it, I guess, as a bomb shelter, or perhaps they'd been ordered in there by Saddam Hussein. In public relations terms, that was sort of the worst day of the war, wasn't it?
I think it was, and it started to turn things about our approach to the war and wanting to end it quickly. I think the difference this time around is, one, our intelligence is so much better than it was. General McInerney has mentioned the Global Hawk, Global Predator, our other drones that we have, plus sources on the ground. So we know a whole lot better and in a more timely fashion where possible civilian people might be collecting. And then we are so much more accurate with our weapons delivery capability that we have moved to minimize this risk dramatically. And as General McInerney said, there will be some, but they will be very, very small.
I'm wondering if our Pentagon correspondent Brett Baer is available to me right now, and whether I can talk to him. Not available at the moment. Well, when we want to get back to him later. But in the meantime, Generals, thank you very much for your guidance on these issues. Let me give it back to you in New York. Shep?
All right, Britt, thanks very much. We're continuing to get updates from the region. And right now, the camera with which we are looking shows not much of anything happening. But in the city of Mosul to the north, there is said to be a sustained bombing campaign. And this is continuing pretty much around the clock. It's just a matter of what we can see at any given moment. One of the more interesting aspects to come out of the Pentagon briefing was this word that the troops had moved 100 miles in what amounts to 24 hours from the Kuwaiti border into Iraq. Fastest travel ever. They're ahead of schedule on many fronts, and that is because they have faced very sporadic resistance. And let's listen in Baghdad. I believe that one long blast of the siren is the all-clear signal, the all-clear for the air raid horns over the city of Baghdad. So for now, at least, the stand-down order is on. Lots of discussion about the people who were victimized by these bombings and the rest. We have not a single report of any civilian spots being hit, no homes, no schools, no accidents, no anything except the particular buildings which were targeted. To update those about which we have direct knowledge, Saddam Hussein's main palace inside Baghdad, just to the west of the Euphrates River, just outside of Center City, was said to be in flames in the very early going of all of this. The first strike, which happened at just about 3 hours ago. Then there was a long lull for about an hour, and then 2 hours ago another campaign began, and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld saying that that was the beginning of tonight's campaign, one which would be sustained throughout the night. We've gotten lots of reports from the Pentagon and Brett Baer and his sources suggesting that no one really knows who is in control of the Iraqi military at this moment. It's Brett's understanding from his sources that Saddam Hussein was at a minimum wounded. There are reports of his demise, but none of which have been confirmed, to put it mildly. In fact, no one is going there at this point. Carl Cameron instead is reporting that there is no intelligence to suggest that Saddam Hussein or his two sons or any of the top 5 senior leadership have had any contact whatsoever with the troops in the field, the Republican Guard. We have been getting briefings and updates throughout the day from the Pentagon. Let's go to Major Garrett, who's at the Pentagon as well, with an update on what we do know at this moment. Major, what can you tell us? Trying.
Shepard, here's what we can tell you so far, and this is what will sort of communicate to our audience the sequential nature of what is transpiring not only in Baghdad, but throughout the country of Iraq. And I want to underscore something that the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said, that though there are cameras positioned in Baghdad, obviously, and with embedded reporters for this network, that is but a mere slice and a moment in time in an evolving and ongoing campaign that covers the entire country of Iraq. But one of the things we've just been advised by senior military officials that's going on, particularly as it relates to Baghdad, is that unarmed munitions, cruise missiles, Tomahawk missiles, and stealth aircraft, both of the fighter and the bomber variety, are making early runs in Baghdad. Why? Because there is one place in Baghdad where Iraqi air defense systems are actually pretty good, and it is in Baghdad, where they have been concentrated and improved since the Gulf War. And so what is going on is a constant assessment of the Iraqis' ability to use that air defense system, all that anti-aircraft fire that we see during these various raids, to see if how that is being degraded, and if it is once it is degraded, safe enough for non-stealth aircraft to participate and join in the assault on Baghdad. That is one of the things that's being evaluated on a near minute-by-minute basis, and in these early raids we are continuing to see unmanned, or in the case of aircraft, stealth aircraft leading the charge. At some point in the future, we may see additional aircraft that do not have that stealth radar evading capability join the fray. But right now, the Pentagon and the Central Command commanders in charge are reviewing all that data, and as you see these waves, that's among the things that's being assessed in between the arrival of the various munitions falling in Baghdad and other parts of the country. A couple of other things to point out as far as overall military significance. The announcement by Turkey that 2 air corridors are now open and available to coalition aircraft is very, very important. Why? Because the United States and its coalition partners cannot fly directly into northern Iraq from Syria. They have to do a long arc from the Mediterranean Sea and the various platforms, aircraft carriers and battle groups in the Mediterranean, a long arc over Turkey, then into Iraq. Having air corridors opened at coalition aircraft now makes that available, makes the various penetration of Iraq in the north to key cities such as Baghdad, other northern cities, to Crete, others, more available to coalition aircraft. That's a vital and important military change in the last 24 hours.
Major, hate to interrupt, but I need to go to... Thanks very much. Need to go to Kuwait City real quickly, where the air raid sirens just went off. Our correspondent William Langeness is there now, wearing his gas mask. William, what do you know?
Well, Shepard, just minutes ago we had the missile warning for Kuwait. We have not had the all clear signal yet. It usually is about can range anywhere from 2 minutes to 5, but this is the 3rd missile warning we had today, and indeed earlier today, U.S. Patriot missile battery did knock out another inbound Iraqi missile. We don't know. We do know that basically the missile shield, the umbrella that is here, is a joint operation between the United States and Kuwait. It covers the entire country of Kuwait all the way down to Qatar. And what in essence is, as we talked to some Kuwait military commanders today, is that when they find that the coordinates of an incoming missile is directed at Kuwait, not into a battlefield situation, a smaller missile, that's when the alarm goes off. Now, we don't have an all clear yet. I think there's one thing that we should note about, you may recall, Saddam Hussein, about 3 weeks ago, divided up Iraq into 5 quadrants. The southern quadrant is headed by Ali Hassan al-Majid, also known as Chemical Ali. As you know, that U.S. troops are in southern Iraq right now. They have taken over the Al-Fal Peninsula and basically consolidated positions there in and around Basra, as well as Qasr and some of the border villages. We don't know what the command structure is right now, but if there's one person you don't want on the other side of the fence, it's Chemical Ali. Even if Saddam Hussein is in a degraded state, there's one individual who's demonstrated his willingness to use chemical weapons. He did it in the Anfal operation in the north, also at Halabja in 1988, also gassing Iranian army during the human waves from 80 to 88 during that war. So this individual, if he is in control of Iraqi forces in the south, is an individual that may indeed launch a chemical weapon. Now, out of the 5 Scuds, or 5 missiles rather, that have been pointed at Kuwait and fired at Kuwait so far, 3 have been intercepted by the U.S. military, 2 have been intercepted by the Kuwaiti military. None, however, had chemical warheads. They have all been conventional. And indeed, they have landed, in fact, the one landed today, very close to Kuwait City. It is not a highly accurate weapon, but it can be very lethal. It has a very large warhead with the Scuds. As we've talked about before, the Scud is a weapon that Iraq has told the UN it does not have because it violates the 95-mile rule. The Scud has a range anywhere from 200 to 375 miles. So even though the U.S. has definitely increased the number of of operations against the mobile missile launchers in the south, in the no-fly zone and elsewhere, and they have indeed stepped up those operations today, looking for the missile launchers, looking for the mobile missile Scud launchers as well. It doesn't mean one can't get through. As we know, there are operations in the south, in Basra. It is possible that the missile shield that I've told you about may have picked up a missile headed for U.S. troops in that area. We just don't know. Shepard?
All right, William Lajeunesse donning his gas mask outside our newsroom in Kuwait City. William, if there are any further developments there, we'll get back to you. Let us know when the all clear sounds so we stop worrying about you. This to report, too, as sort of an aside, so many watching this and trying to assess how well this campaign is going so far. They're speaking on Wall Street. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, the Dow up 204 points today, and this would be the 8th straight session for a winning day on the corner of Wall and Broad, and that has not happened in the past 2 years. You're looking live now at the U.S., or actually this is tape pictures that have just come in to us from the USS Constellation. In fact, I think we're grabbing them off the bird as they come in, but these are some of the launches that are happening or happened just a short time ago from the USS Constellation. And of course, we have personnel on board the USS Constellation, and if you have never been on board one of these carriers, this moment and that catapult is truly a show of force and power that is almost impossible to describe. The deck of the thing is teeming with people in the orange shirts and the yellow shirts, getting them set to go, and then that long piece of metal on a big rubber band shoots them off the end, and it is a fascinating sight to watch. They do this day in and day out with sorties every afternoon and every morning, getting prepared for this, every day acting as if war is upon us, every day flying the mission as they would once war comes. Everything the same, except for the fact that then they're not carrying live ordnance on this early morning in Baghdad, or this late evening in Baghdad. They certainly are. The red light. So there you go. That is the activity, the flight offs from the USS Constellation. All clear sound siren in Baghdad, and no more bombing going on overhead that we know of. However, clearly this will go on throughout the evening, still hoping for a surrender by the command and control forces of the Iraqi military. But at this moment, no signs of any of that. Again, these pictures to the right here from the USS Constellation. Let's listen as this next one takes off.
Shep, just in connection with the Dow Jones Industrial Average being up, over 200 points, as you said, there's the pollster Scott Rasmussen does a continuing poll of investor confidence, and he gets this investor confidence number just about every day. It's the Rasmussen Economic Confidence Index, and it gained 6 points to 103 on Friday. That follows a 5-point gain yesterday and is up from 88.3 a week ago and 92.2 a month ago, which that had been steadily declining. So apparently the certainty, if that's what it is, that this conflict has engendered, has begun to move people's feelings about the economy.
And I think it's bigger than all that, Neil. I mean, Britt, I'm just getting a message from my buddy Neil Cavuto, who gives me the following facts from Yodel Central. 8 straight days of an uptick has not happened since the year 1996. 1,000 points in little more than a week. That's a 12% upturn in the Dow Jones Industrial Average in a week and a half of trading. 12%. That's an enormous uptick and speaks volumes about what the people who were hit so hard down the street on 9/11 think about this campaign, its success, and what it could do for the overall business climate in America.
And it certainly, Shep, is one more reason why 35 minutes from now one should tune into Your World with Neil Cavuto to find out more about all that.
Indeed it is. We're going to go back to regular programming at the top of the hour. Your World going to focus in to some degree on business and the markets today. What other signs are out there that's making the economy turn up along with the Dow? Neil Cavuto's always a glass half full kind of guy, but today it appears to me at least it's more than half full. These pictures from the USS Constellation as we continue to watch, and Britt, I'll toss it back to you.
Shep, I've been sitting here throughout the afternoon, as you know, with two of our Fox News contributors who are retired Air Force generals. We have watched these pictures come in, and we're noting that, for the moment at least, it's relatively quiet over Baghdad, and all clear was just sounded. General McInerney, General Thomas McInerney, your thoughts about all this now?
Well, they're probably going through a phase because the tankers and all the complexities of getting them in, so they flow them in. Remember, only cruise missiles, stealth fighters, or stealth bombers go in the Baghdad area because of those 63 SAM sites. The Navy fighters that you're seeing are working around, and the Air Force fighters that are non-stealthy. And that is just to ensure safety and to minimize the risk of our people. Now, they'll be assessing to see, because the cruise missiles have probably been, most of them have been used on the surface-to-air missile sites, I suspect, and other softer targets. They don't have the penetration like the 2,000-pound bomb does, or the 5,000-pound bomb that we saw earlier that went off, I think, in Saddam's palace. And it's continuous. I suspect we'll fly well over 1,000 sorties today.
So how many do you estimate? I mean, it's impossible to know, but what's your sense about how far we are into this?
Well, we're look at the clock, and we're probably on a 24-hour scale. We're about 8 hours into it, and so we're a third of the way through. That's a guess.
It is. This is something, General Burt Moore, that we have not seen before, in part because we never seen anything so well. I mean, our ability to see this. I remember it was one camera or two with the night vision lens that allowed us that vision, that those shots of Baghdad 12 years ago when the fighting began, or when the air campaign began. It looked very much like that picture you see right there on our screen. This is something we've never seen before because we've had so many different views of it. But in terms of sheer scope, so far at least, it's this is nothing to be sniffed at. And obviously, if you're anywhere near those explosions, I'm sure they're pretty shocking, and you feel pretty awed. But one feels a sense a little bit of maybe this is just the beginning.
I think it is the beginning, but I don't think it's a very long story that we're going to tell. And we've said from the start that we think these targeting is going to be very, very selective, particularly in and around Baghdad. It's going to be very, very precise, and it's going to be very, very decisive. And I think that's how we're shaping the air battle around Baghdad now. And of course, we're only seeing part even of Baghdad, just a very small quadrant. So we don't know what's going on outside of camera range. We also have to remember that up in Mosul, up in Kirkuk and Tikrit, there's air activity going on that's also fairly substantial, as well as the close air support and battlefield prep down in the Basra area as the 1st Marine Division continues its march.
So no doubt a lot going on, and perhaps we'd all be more shocked and in greater awe if we had a broader sense of the full scope of the campaign. The president, I believe, has left for Camp David, but let's find out where the president is and what have been the developments from the White House from our White House correspondent, Wendell Golder. Wendell?
Brett, you're right. The president did leave for Camp David earlier this afternoon. White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer just concluded his daily briefing. The question that dominated it, and you know the White House press corps sometimes gets a question stuck in its throat. This one Fleischer got a half a dozen times. Is the president really not watching these compelling pictures of the war he launched on television? Fleischer insists he is not. He said, quote, "I don't know the president needed to watch TV to understand what it means to authorize military force and to know that the mission has begun and the mission is underway." But Fleischer says he was in the Oval Office when the heavy bombardment of Baghdad began this afternoon. He says the president was not watching television, though he did not rule out that Mr. Bush may have flipped on a television after he, Ari Fleischer, left the Oval Office. As I said, Mr. Bush left earlier this afternoon for Camp David. He and the First Lady will spend the weekend up there. They will convene the War Council up there tomorrow. Most of the members expected to actually travel to Camp David, though he may also communicate with some, including General Tommy Franks in the Persian Gulf by secure video conference. Fleischer says that Camp David, a Marine camp, has all the facilities to keep the president in constant communication with any place in the world as he needs. Earlier today, Mr. Bush met with Republican and congressional leaders, told them to stay focused on the domestic agenda, also gave them compliments of Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, a classified briefing on the progress of the war. The president spoke to reporters then, said, "We're we're making progress. We will stay on task until we've achieved our objective, which is to rid Iraq of weapons of mass destruction and free the Iraqi people so they can live in a society that is hopeful and democratic and at peace in its neighborhood. White House not shedding much light on these reports that Saddam Hussein may have been killed or injured in Wednesday night's decapitation attempt. Ari Fleischer saying that they just don't know. The CIA has concluded, however, that that is Saddam Hussein on a videotape broadcast to the Iraqi people on Thursday, though Fleischer says that that tape could have been made at any time days ahead of time. Some of the people who think that that Saddam was killed or wounded in that attack have cited as evidence of that his former mistress's claim that the person in the tape is a body double, but the CIA has concluded that that is not the case. Finally, Britt, on a personal note,
I wanted to take you back, if I could, for a moment to that briefing. I noticed that the president got a number of questions, or the press secretary got a number of questions, excuse me, about the level of the president's engagement. And I believe at one point he was asked if the president was trying to not associate himself with this war, which was a kind of an interesting question to ask of a spokesman for a man who had made a national television address the night before last that was watched by about 1 zillion people. But I don't recall what Ari Fleischer said, but I thought the question was striking.
Well, it was, and it certainly Ari said that that is not the case at all, and it's not a matter of the president not wanting to associate himself with the war. Fleischer's insistence was that Mr. Bush didn't need the television pictures to tell him, the president, what he had set in motion. That said, it stretched everybody's credulity, if you will, that he would not glance up at these incredibly compelling pictures that have gripped the nation, this shock and awe that began today in Baghdad. And
particularly the ones that are being shown on our network, right,
well,
Wendell?
I won't go there, Britt, but on that shock and awe, the people of Saginaw, Michigan, a fine city of which my uncle, Henry Marsh, was for a brief time the mayor, don't particularly, I think, like you calling them a summer camp and associating them with the shock and awe going on in Baghdad. So
well,
I want to let
wait
you
a minute,
know
Wendell, that's
that
not...
and say hi to my Uncle Hank.
Well, all the warmest regards indeed, and best respects to your Uncle Hank. But what I said was that shock and awe, which has become probably the most overworked cliche of this war so far, was not a summer camp in Michigan. But that was a few days ago, before we had all become so utterly familiar with the term and what it meant. So Wendell, with regards to your uncle and the good people of Saginaw, Michigan, where I hope that Fox News is popular, thanks very much for your report. Shep, back to you in New York, buddy.
I'm shocked and awed. Thank you both. I want to take a look at some of the first still pictures that are coming out. Associated Press with a number of photographers on scene in the region, and these are some of the first stills. On the right of the screen now, that, I believe at least, is the main palace, Saddam Hussein's palace, or a portion thereof, burning, at least a government building. I don't have specifics about exactly what's burning, but it's my understanding that this is a portion of the palace. This coming to us from Jerome Daly, or Jerome DeLay, that is, of the Associated Press. This looks like that first big explosion that happened. I don't know if you remember the shot that we've replayed repeatedly when this cameras swept around, and it looked like on the banks of a river there, and an enormous explosion in the background. This looks like that particular one. Of course, it could be a building burning. I don't know what it is, but it's nice looking, isn't it? This is another explosion believed to have been one of those enormous bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs that we've talked about at length. The series of explosions were all lined up there. The very first one, which happened about noon Eastern time, one bomb after another, described by General McInerney just shortly thereafter. And though it may not be the perfect way to put it, it was quite an impressive sight. Quite an impressive sight along from the cameras, the television cameras. This still, which we took from Abu Dhabi television, it would appear at least, as all of that, as that bombing barrage was happening, We do know that the early bombing was targeting Saddam Hussein's palaces, and immediately after that, some command and control centers. We do know that Saddam Hussein's main palace just outside the center city of Baghdad. Yeah, Britt.
I just wanted to bring in General McInerney and General Moore here on that one particular picture we're looking at right now, which has got some distinct plumes of smoke and perhaps gives them the ability to tell us what kind of ordnance may have hit it. General?
Well, Britt, first of all, I think it could be, it may not be, but it could be just one B-2 or several B-2s, because each B-2 can drop 16 of those separately.
Except 16 of these precision-guided
munitions. Yes, at different targets.
Each of those plumes of smoke, in your estimation, represent a different bomb hitting a different target?
That's correct, absolutely. Oh, there's no question about that. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2 in the back, 7.
And again, you got the flames, which
7 the flames, which are bombs just going off. And so that could be, or it could be multiple airplanes, but normally the 117 doesn't come in and it drops 2.
That's the
stealth. And it can't drop them in ripple. It has to drop it at once, so at one target. So the fact is that is probably a B-2, and General Moore knows he didn't have that in '91. He wishes he did have it, because that's one of the additive things when we talked about this warfare and this precision air campaign.
Exactly, and it shows what we've done in 12 years, and there's a string of 6 bombs there, and each one of those bombs, I can guarantee, are within a foot or a meter of where they were aimed, and that's only 6, and the fact that they came out in a string, to me, does suggest that they came from one B-2.
Now, General, there have been a lot of people who felt that you remember all the pictures that that General Schwarzkopf at his briefings 12 years ago showed to such effect. The shots from the camera. Right. From the airplanes that showed those things hitting their target. We had the idea then that we really had a lot of precision-guided munitions going in that war. Turned out we had fewer than I guess people got the impression we had, and also perhaps that they weren't as accurate as we thought. Are these weapons really as accurate as you say they are? Are we likely to find out later, well, we're sorry about the orphanage down the street or whatever?
Well, they are as accurate as we think they are, but we've got to remember, anytime you've got some technology that's guiding these weapons to the target, you can have a loss of signal. And if you have a loss of signal, or if the bomb goes what we call dumb, which means it's just a ballistic projectile.
It's a dud.
Yeah, just
an electronic dud.
Yeah, an electronic dud. Then, of course, it could drop on its pre-programmed path, and it's not going to have any more correction. So those things will happen. We hope not very often, and that's probably where your collateral damage and civilian casualties might come.
All right, General, thank you very much.
Let me say something.
Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead, General.
Well,
sorry,
let me say something on that. There was a concern about the jamming on the GPS. The GPS jammers.
The Iraqis would be able to jam our global positioning system, which would, guidance system.
Yes, which would impact the Joint Direct Attack Munition, these bombs. Well, the fact is the B-2, we did some tests, and it was almost impervious to it. And that's why I think once we go in and measure the accuracy, that was one of those concerns that we took care of. The Air Force worked it very carefully, and I think you just saw the example of it did work.
All right, Shep.
Britt just had one more picture I wanted to show you. This is an interesting one. On the first day, the president meeting with his war council, with the back there to us, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, and then the CIA Director George Tenet, Chief of Staff Andy Card, the President, the Secretary of State Colin Powell, the Secretary of Defense there Donald Rumsfeld, the Joint Chiefs Chairman General Myers, that from Eric Draper at the White House, the War Council meets on the first day of shock and awe.
And that is a room, Shep, that I covered the White House for 8 years, and I have never, and sooner or later they drag you around to various events and photo ops and even an occasional social event in the White House, and you get to see pretty much of the whole compound there in West Wing. I've never been in that room.
Is that right?
General McInerney, you been in that room?
Yes, I was, Britt.
What is it?
That's the Situation Room, and when I was Assistant Vice Chief of Staff, I was invited over to go into it because I supported the airplanes and that. And it's a small room, as rooms go. It's much like the tank in the Pentagon. But that's where the president does all his crisis action movement, etc.
Shep, it puts me in mind of an anecdote. You may recall 12 years ago there was only one cable channel on the cable news channel on the air. That was our colleagues over at CNN, who really made the name for themselves that they have enjoyed over the years during the coverage of that Gulf War. And I remember one day some wild and improbable, but nonetheless tantalizing rumor came rolling in, and I got the call at the White House to check it out, and everybody was terribly serious about it, and I can't remember what it was, but I went back and knocked on Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater's door and got in to see him, and I said, look, I'm sorry to bother you with this, but they're driving me nuts with this. Can you check this out? And in my presence, he picked up the phone and called that Situation Room, which is staffed on a 24-hour basis by people who were not visible to you in that picture. And he stayed on the phone for a second, and he hung up the phone, and he said, they say they don't have anything on it, and that CNN doesn't either.
Of course, it was CNN that made its name at that time, but if I remember, it was Britt Hume who won the Emmy. That on the side there, and you're looking live on the right-hand side of your screen. This from Fairford Air Force Base in the UK. These are B-52 flight operations which are underway. Of course, it's the B-52s, yes, which we were watching last night, Britt, and sort of gave us an early heads up that all of this might happen. It's the B-52s which carry all the ordnance which makes shock and awe happen.
And General McInerney, that has been an enduring piece of the American arsenal, hasn't it?
Absolutely, Britt, and they want to keep it another 30 years.
When did it first fly?
Around 1948, 49, and we brought it in.
Jet powered now, though, right?
Oh, it was.
Was then?
It was then, too. Orville Wright didn't fly it, but those airplanes were probably 61 and 62 when they were built. They're B-52Hs. That's RAF Shep, Royal Air Force, Fairford. And I've operated there for many years. When I was the 3rd Air Force Commander in England, that was one of my bases. It's one of the bases that we launched sorties out for the Libyan raid. A very important base, and our United Kingdom friends have been absolutely marvelous, marvelous friends out there.
General, how long a flight from there at Fairford to the target zone?
Well, let's depend which way.
For the B-52, yeah.
Yeah, 6 to 8 hours, and you know, it depends if you get certain overflight rights, what goes on there, or if you have to go the long way, which we had to do in the Libyan raid. But I think that the Germans have been very good. The question is what Austria may be a problem, or Switzerland, and so or down through France. So it depends which route, but let's say 6 to 8 hours after they take off. They're in the Mediterranean and then back up through Turkey. I've done that flight from the United Kingdom, and I flew from the United Kingdom all the way down into Iran when Iran was part of CENTO. That was a 12-hour flight going down that way. That's a little further, but it takes about 6 to 8 hours to get in the target area. And then, of course, depending how long you stay in the target area, Shep, and then on your recovery. So you could easily have a 16-hour flight there in that mission, or with probably 3 refuelings.
Mid-air?
Mid-air refuelings, absolutely.
Interesting. General, thanks. I want to drop in for just a second. We have so many reporters and producers and others who are embedded with our own military and who have been traveling with them for a number of days. One of the people with whom we've had almost no contact over the past few days has been our national correspondent, Steve Centani. He has been traveling with the Navy SEALs and is joining us live from Kuwait. It's good to see your head back out of the sand, Steve Centani. Tell us what you've seen.
Shep, yes, good to be here. A very interesting and exciting operation last night. Just about 24 hours ago, the Navy SEALs, a unit based in San Diego, stormed aboard the 2 main oil terminals that Iraq ships their oil out of, took control, made sure that Saddam Hussein could not open up the spigots and flood the Persian Gulf with oil, made sure he couldn't blow up these oil terminals and render them useless for any future use, and made sure they will be useful in the future. So now the U.S. Marines are holding it. The SEALs came ashore. The Marines are now holding it, and the U.S., temporarily at least, is in charge of the 2 main oil shipment terminals in Iraq. Now, I was with this crew when they went out there. There were some SEAL teams that went out on various boats. They sped up to that location. They staged there. They waited for the appointed time, and then they went in, driving their boats right up to the stairs underneath these massive mile-long oil terminals, climbing up the stairs onto the decks, and taking control. They went straight to the valves to make sure nobody could open them up and flood the Persian Gulf with millions of barrels of oil. And then they took prisoners, some captive oil workers who were on, 23 of them were on one of these oil terminals, 18 were on the other. Now the main one is the Mina al-Bakra oil terminal, and that's one we went on. They've been using this primarily for the Food for Oil program for Iraq to ship out the oil they are allowed to sell under UN regulations. So after it had been taken, we went on board. We were first in the command center aboard the Valley Forge, which is a guided missile cruiser, and then we got in one of these ribs, they called, which is a rigid hull inflatable boat, and zipped up a few miles away up to this oil terminal after it had been taken. One room was filled with these captives, about 23 of them lying on the floor, their hands tied behind their back, hoods over their heads so that we couldn't see them. We weren't allowed to take pictures, but they were being guarded very, very closely by U.S. Marines who had followed the SEALs very closely thereafter. So they're going to be questioned, find out exactly who they are. They're apparently civilian oil workers. Some of them say they're in the Iraqi army, so they're going to have to be investigated, and then the U.S. will have to determine what happens. But here's another key point. They found some explosives on board there, a box full of explosives. They also found some grenade launchers, some machine guns, some small arms, and stacks of these metal cartons of ammunition. So they were either planning some resistance, or the U.S. military believes some of these people on board had been put there specifically to try to rig this terminal with explosives and at some point blow it up. So the Navy SEALs got there just in time to stop that kind of catastrophe. They got there in time to stop the spigot from being opened, and they have secured these two main oil terminals, which are 22 miles offshore from the southern Iraqi coast and 7 miles apart from each other. And these oil terminals have come under fire during the Iran-Iraq war before. They came under fire during the 1991 Gulf War. So they've seen a lot of action. They've been in the world's eye, and they're there once again now as the U.S. takes control, seizing control in a very dramatic preemptive move by Navy SEALs just last night, about 24 hours ago. Shep?
Steve, I'm wondering if that's the sort of operation that was happening all over the place. We've been talking for weeks about how important it is to control all of the oil facilities and not allow Saddam Hussein and his men to blow these things up and deprive the Iraqi people of the money eventually, which is justly theirs. Have you been able to get a sense for whether this is happening hither and yon?
I have a sense that similar operations may be happening hither and yon. I have no positive information on that, but certainly, as you said, this is a top priority for the U.S. military to take control of the oil infrastructure, the oil fields themselves. Iraq, as you know, has the second largest oil reserve in the world. It's going to be vital to Iraq's future. If we can secure that, make sure they can live on and grow on that economic stability that's going to be brought by the oil, they're going to be in a lot better shape. So we're not there to seize it to keep it, obviously, but to seize it and protect it for the Iraqi people in the future. And that's what we did on these two big oil terminals last night, the Mina al-Bakra oil terminal and the Khor al-Amaya, which are about 20 miles offshore from the southern coast of Iraq. So they're now in safe hands. They're trying to head off an environmental catastrophe, and they apparently did, because some explosives, in fact, were rigged to the actual pipeline, enough to probably blow it open and send that oil spilling into the Persian Gulf. So they got there in time to stop that. They found some of the explosives. The search continued. Explosives experts from the U.S. Marines were on there as we left last night. We were only on there for about a half an hour, and they were there still checking it out to make sure it wasn't booby-trapped. But that was the biggest fear, is the SEALs went ashore, that this thing could have been booby-trapped, so that as soon as anybody touched this platform or this terminal, it blew up. Well, luckily that didn't happen. They were very well equipped and well trained and went on board these things, knowing what the dangers were, being very careful and watching for any booby traps, and everything went very smoothly. These Iraqi workers who were on board surrendered easily. They didn't try to shoot anybody. There were no shots fired, but some of them were taken captive and they're being interrogated.
Fascinating story, Steve. While you were talking earlier, our viewers may have heard a noise in the background. Initially, I wondered if it was at your location, but in fact, now we know air raid sirens have gone off yet again in Baghdad. We'll continue to watch all of our monitors and all of our cameras there, while General Burton Moore has a question for you. General, go right ahead.
Steve, General Moore in Washington. First, I think the work of the Navy SEALs is indicative of this wonderful professional force we have in America. The second question I have, and you mentioned some of the oil terminals being rigged. Do you have any indication that there was widespread rigging of oil fields or pumps and what have you up beyond the terminal itself?
No, we don't have. In fact, the terminal itself had some explosives attached as if it was rigged to blow up. It was not booby-trapped so that the troops would have been in danger when they came ashore. The SEALs, when they came aboard these things, was not booby-trapped. And there were boxes of explosives, so it looked like they were planning some kind of a more organized rigging of this thing to blow it up at some point. But we don't know that for sure. We just had the boxes of explosives. We had the explosives rigged to part of the pipeline. And one of the Navy SEALs who was there last night said it didn't look like a very professional job. It looked sort of half-hearted. In fact, he said some of these guys who were on board, who were probably out there at Saddam Hussein's orders to carry out this explosive mission, seemed relieved that they didn't have to continue their work, that they didn't have to create this environmental catastrophe. They gave up very easily, some with their hands over their heads right away. They had to search out a few who were hiding in some of the nooks and crannies aboard the terminal, but they rounded everybody up and very, very little resistance. And the SEALs say they seemed relieved and that it was somewhat of a half-hearted, unprofessional attempt to rig this thing for destruction.
Question for you, too, as well. General, go ahead.
Steve, General Tom McInerney, again, I want to compliment the SEALs on the marvelous work they're doing. You know, a lot of people don't see or hear this, so the work that you're doing to bring this back is superb. You kind of got a lot of my question, and it was really the intensity and the deliberateness that these people were exhibiting to do this. It sounds like they were not enthusiastic for it, and as you said, they were relieved. Have we gotten any more feedback? Because that's really of interest to the American people and the public in general, because it tells the general attitude of all the Iraqi forces in many cases.
Well, that's right. No, we were told by some of the people who stormed aboard, a couple of these platoons of SEALs who were there, one of their leaders said that these guys were just following orders. They'd been sent out there. We don't know if some of them were actual legitimate workers to load and unload oil onto ships that sometimes park there. There were no ships there last night, by the way. No ships tied up at the terminal at all. They could have been legitimate workers. Some of them could have been sent, as the U.S. is speculating, specifically to carry out this explosive mission. That's why they're going to have to be questioned very, very carefully and see what their intent was and see who they are. But he says they were just carrying out orders, and they didn't particularly want to do the job, but they had to. If you refuse an order from Saddam Hussein, you know what could happen. So they were out there. They had to be there. They had to carry out their work, but it looked half-hearted. It wasn't very professional. The thing wasn't rigged in a very organized way that would have brought it all down at once, or any key part or all the key parts at once or anything like that. It was just somewhat spotty. So they got there in time to prevent possibly something from happening. We don't know if the whole thing would have gone sky high, but certainly it's now in safe hands for Iraq's future, and an environmental catastrophe may very well have been prevented.
Steve, thanks for being our eyes and ears out there. What was it like all of a sudden as you realized you were about to witness this sort of thing?
Well, at first we didn't know what we were going to witness until just a few hours before the mission. We knew we were going to go with the SEALs because we were at a base where they were located, getting their boats ready, staging this mission, but we didn't know exactly what they were going to do until a few hours beforehand. Then they told us. Then we loaded on this boat, a Mark V, which is a stealthy boat the SEALs use, a very fast boat, a very powerful boat that it doesn't show up very easily on the enemy radar either. It's very stealthy and very quiet. We got on that and went out to the Valley Forge and watched inside the Combat Control Center as all the commanders there were watching what happened. They had a helicopter hovering over these two oil terminals, two different helicopters, feeding back live pictures. These were FLIR, or forward-looking infrared pictures, so that we were seeing on video screens exactly what was happening as these guys were coming up to the platform in their ribs, which is the inflatable, and climbing aboard the platform. We were watching the whole thing, and then it was only 2 minutes after they'd climbed aboard the terminal that they were up there on one of the platforms with their prisoners. The guys were down on the ground, and our guys were standing over them, and there didn't seem like anything had happened. Certainly not much time had passed. It was very peaceful, and we were very lucky for that. It was also very calm weather out there last night. They've been practicing this for a long time, and they've had to put up with some very stormy seas, some dust storms, all kinds of bad conditions, but last night was calm as could be, a moonlit night. They went in under cover of darkness, although they had some illumination. That helped a little bit. Things went very, very smoothly, luckily, because there were no shots fired, and everybody was very happy with the way it came out.
You spent a lot of time a few years back with the men on board the George Washington out in the Persian Gulf, and they talked about all the different sorts of weather conditions and all the different sorts of hostilities which were created for them in their training process. And then after some of their first runs on a calm sky with a real mission, they said that was a piece of cake compared to what we've been through. Was that sort of the attitude you got from the SEALs?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, big relief for these guys to see the good weather, the nice night. The sea started out a little bit choppy as we headed out toward the Valley Forge and waited there. And then when we got on board the Rib, their inflatable boat to go up to the oil terminal, it was almost as calm as glass. It was a beautiful night. The stars were out. The moon was out. It was warm. Yeah, but the SEALs train under very rigorous conditions. They go through a 6-month training program that would kill most people, and only about 25% of the people who enter the training program down there in San Diego actually come out of it and become SEALs. It is so rigorous. They're on the beach. They're in and out of the water. They put them in and out of hypothermia so that they get used to very, very extreme situations, extreme water temperatures, extreme weather. They're very cold. They're exhausted. They get little or no sleep. And the ones who come out of it are extremely well suited for this kind of work. Then they go through more and more training, and they're probably one of the most highly trained and most capable special operations forces that we have in the U.S. military.
Well, God bless them. Steve Centani, thanks for your eyes out there. Appreciate it, and we'll be checking back with you over the days and hours to come. Wow, what a 24-hour period this has been. We began watching last night as the third ID just made its way from Kuwait right into Iraq, and we watched on multiple networks around this globe, including our own Greg Kelly, as he moved toward Baghdad. We now know that they made 100 miles in 24 hours or less, and that's a record. We also know that in the early going, they captured the southern part of the nation of Iraq, captured the most important port, stopped a number of oil fires from happening, may have on the first strike knocked out the command and control and the senior leadership, though we're not yet sure. They've destroyed, it would appear, Saddam Hussein's main palace inside Baghdad, and to the best of our knowledge, at least, civilian casualties have been non-existent or to a minimum. What a 24 hours of history, Britt. And though shock and awe may not all fit onto one television screen at one time, it seems as if that's what's happening across the country.
Well, Shep, it is certainly something to hope that this perhaps is not an early point in this conflict, but perhaps instead a turning point, and that the sense you got from the briefings from Secretary Rumsfeld and the other reporting that Brett Baer and Major Garrett have done from the Pentagon, indicating that there is a considerable belief inside the Pentagon that the command structure of the Iraqi military and the regime itself may be starting to crumple. It may be, Shep, that we'll be a day or two away from a decisive moment here, and that all of this can be done with a minimum of destruction and a minimum of casualties. It seems at least possible. It's something that a lot of these demonstrators who are out there, no doubt with heartfelt worry that a great many people will die, may be proved wrong in all this, and that would be a good thing indeed.
Let's hope so. And the best thing of all, of course, is, as President Bush and Prime Minister Blair have been saying for weeks on end, that there must be a better way of life for people who have lived inside Iraq for the past 12 years with very little to eat, with an oil for food program that's been taking all the resources away by Saddam Hussein, to continue to build a military, to continue to build a fighting machine and put himself in a position to put his neighbors in harm's way. And the very idea that that money could be redirected, that the sanctions could end, that the oil money could go to the people who deserve it, and that Iraq could become a free and vital part of the world economy, that seems something worth striving for, at least to hear it from those leaders.
And you know, Shep, we may also be beginning to see the fruits of an information policy adopted by the Pentagon as an adaptation to complaints that had been heard in previous conflicts, that the journalists simply did not have enough access to the men and women who were doing the fighting and didn't really have a sense of what was going on. Well, we have had a sense of what was going on like nothing we have ever had before in all this. The Steve Centani's report, which he could not give us until the mission was over, was but a recent example of that. And one of the striking things about this may turn out, Shep, to be that journalists who have existed, I think, in some respects, across a great cultural divide from the military men and women of our country, may be getting a better chance than many of them have ever had before to see what the people who do the fighting for this country are really like, and to see what level of training they have, what level of professionalism is with which they're imbued. I know I came away from my experience, and I was never a military reporter, but just what exposure I've had to those people, very impressed indeed with the way they do their work and with the way this country represents itself around the world. So that's something else, Shep, to keep an eye on here.
It's been quite a cooperation and a real pleasure to work with you, Britt. Some of our Fox stations up and down the line will be dropping out to join their local coverage and their local stations. I'm Shepard Smith in New York.
Well, shock and awe, Operation Iraqi Freedom continued now with a barrage of bombs on Saddam's palace in Baghdad today and command and control centers pretty much throughout Iraq. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying now that several hundred targets will be hit in the next few hours. So we're not done. Allied troops are now said to be 100 miles into Iraq, and that Iraqi soldiers have been surrendering in the north and southern part of the country at a rate of hundreds. That proved all the more good news for Wall Street. As Shep pointed out, the Dow up better than 200 points today. It's 8th straight advance, something that has not happened since November 1996. What's more, the Dow's gains this week are the best in 20 years. Stocks are now at nearly 1,000 points, or more than 12% in that period. Turkey, meantime, has opened its airspace to coalition aircraft. That should make things a lot easier for Allied forces to conduct operations in northern Iraq. And a 6th Marine has been killed in the line of duty. The Marine, a member of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, died while taking action against enemy Iraqi forces near the port of Qasr. Another Marine died in a firefight in southern Iraq. 4 others were killed when that helicopter crashed. 8 British soldiers were among those killed as well. Well, they said you know it when you saw it. We saw it and we knew it. Shock and awe for Baghdad and beyond. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and we are all over your world. Well, we knew it would be big. Few thought it would be this big. Hundreds of sorties pounding everything from top government offices to at least 2 of Saddam's palaces. But as Saddam was getting clocked, stocks were just rocked. The Dow up another 200-plus points today, make that north of 1,000 points in just a week. More on that enormous advance in just a second. For now, I want to go to the Pentagon, where some late-breaking developments could still propel both Main Street and Wall Street. Major Garrett is there. Major.
Good afternoon, Neil. Some specifics now on this latest element of the air campaign against Baghdad and other key areas throughout the country of Iraq. Fox News has confirmed through senior military sources that among those aircraft involved, specifically in this raid that began about 12:30 Eastern Time, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, B-2 stealth bombers, F-117A stealth fighter jets, and many Tomahawk cruise missiles. We are told by senior military officials that there are no fewer, Neil, than 3,000 targets in the overall scope of this latest air campaign. Now, I want to clarify that 3,000 targets. Now, there could be several targets, for example, of importance in 1 or 2 buildings. So you may, under a certain military circumstance, use one type of munition to deal with 2 or 3 or 4 targets. But clearly, up to 3,000 targets in this latest part of the air campaign against Iraq, not only in Baghdad, where we have cameras, of course, but throughout the country, especially in northern Iraq, places like Mosul, Kirkuk, Tikrit, and also in southern Iraq as well. Among the other things we can point out, significant successes on the ground in southern Iraq. What do I mean by that? The securing of 2 main oil terminals off the coast of Iraq, now under the control of U.S. and coalition forces. Those terminals could have been booby-trapped. There were attempts to booby-trap them. That oil is now secure in those terminals. It can be used to be sold on the open market, and it can no longer pose a threat of contamination in the Persian Gulf, something that the military had been quite concerned about. Shifting now over to western Iraq, another significant success obtained by coalition special operations forces, securing 2 principal air bases known around here at the Pentagon as H-2 and H-3. It was from those air bases back in the first Persian Gulf War that Scud missiles were fired over Jordan into Israel. Special Operations Forces have secured both of those air bases and are now in the process, with the help of other forces, to eliminate entirely the Scud box from which those Scuds could have been fired in western Iraq. Also, those air bases will soon become operational. Troops will pour in there to begin the campaign push from western Iraq up toward Baghdad. Those are the key operational successes so far, Neil. Back to you in New York.
Major Garrett, thank you very much. Another item we have in our newsroom right now from our Carl Cameron. We hope to get him here very shortly. U.S. and Mexican officials are searching for Iraqis with some toxic chemicals. We don't know much more than that, but that Fox has learned that U.S. and Mexican officials are searching for 6 Iraqis who are currently at large in either the southern part of this country or northern Mexico, and they may have on their possession toxic materials requiring some temperature controls. Again, Carl should be here shortly to update us on that. Obviously, there's been concern about a tit-for-tat with our going into Iraq here. This could be a sign of that, was something we're keeping a very close eye on. Ahead of that, though, let's go to Kuwait City, where those warning alarms were sounding yet again. That's where you'll find our William Lajeunesse. William.
Well, Neil, we got the all clear about 40 minutes ago, but defense officials here confirming that there was another Iraqi missile intercepted just over Kuwait. It did land, however, inside Iraq. That makes 6 missiles now fired at Kuwait that have been intercepted successfully by Patriot missiles. It tells us one thing. Possibly there is a battle going on north of us with U.S. and Iraqi forces, also telling us that there may still be significant missile assets inside Iraq. But as the defense secretary said, this war is about many things, weapons of mass destruction, ties to terrorism, but also about liberation. Take a look right now. This is the first village, Iraqi village, liberated by U.S. forces, Safwan, right over the Kuwaiti border. Their individuals greeted American troops with cheers and signs of handshakes and high fives, if you will, saying, Saddam, your days are numbered. Cut off his head. People tore down the poster of Saddam Hussein. This, ironically, is the same village where Norman Schwarzkopf in 1991 signed a peace agreement with Iraq back after the first Gulf War. Safwan is part of a larger strategic objective, the Al-Fal Peninsula. As we know, that coalition forces have now virtually consolidated their assets there. Not only Qasr, the port city, also, as Major Garrett said, the oil assets there, the terminal, if you will, also Safwan, and they are now, we are told, surrounding Basra and attempting to engage any Iraqi units there. Also today, several hundred have surrendered, about 300 at last count. It is climbing, we are told by those at the Pentagon. Some have popped up with white flags. Others have given sporadic resistance, then giving up, saying, our officers are fleeing. Why should we fight? Also, this is a technological war, they say. We can't win. Indeed, about that oil assets, one other notation there. This clearly not only secures the economic future of Iraq, not only because of the oil fields in the south and the terminal, but also in Kirkuk. That is 90% of the reserves of Iraq now in coalition hands. Also, of course, preventing what many feared would be a environmental nightmare, if you will, a crime against nature, and the smoke problems and all of the environmental problems associated with that. Coming back to the Scuds, if you will, here we have had a total of 6 Scuds. The video taken today, as you may see, some fragments recovered west of the city near Air Base. That was confirmed now that we have had 2 Scuds, other Al-Samud missiles, smaller Arabil missiles as well. Why is this important? Because inspectors say after the first Gulf War, there were about 50 Scuds still in Iraq, 11 launchers, 125 warheads, 25 warheads possibly with chemical weapons. Why is that important? Because when Saddam Hussein gave certain quadrants of Iraq to different commanders. The one he gave in the south was to Ali Hassan al-Majid, known as Chemical Ali, the man who used chemical weapons both in the Anfal campaign in northern Iraq as well as against the Shiites in the south, and also Iranians during the long 1980-88 Iran-Iraq war. So, Neil, we're not out of the woods yet, but things are looking good for coalition forces.
All right, William Lajeunesse, thank you very much. Be safe. Now, what can we expect in the next stages of shock and awe? We're told that we're still early on in this process. We turn now to Major General Paul Vallely in Washington. General, what do we look for now?
Neil, good afternoon. Well, there's a lot going on. Let's go to the screenwriter and let me bring you up to date on shock and awe, and then we'll talk about the next couple days. If we look at the screenwriter here, major activities down here, Neil, in the Basra and southern area where the 3rd Infantry Division and the Marines have put themselves in a position almost 100 miles, not quite to Baghdad, but if you look at the area up here, that's the H2, H3 area. Now, from that standpoint, we understand that area has been secured, and that's where the Scud box was located in order for Saddam to move his Scud missiles in there and fire into Israel. The other area we just received a report on is the Kirkuk area. The Republican Guard up there has been attacked in 3 different locations. And so that activity, along with the shock and awe of attacking Baghdad today at about 12:30. What's interesting about this, Neil, is that the ground forces actually started to move quicker and before the shock and awe air attack in Baghdad. That's relatively unusual for our strategies. Usually it's the air first and then the ground forces. So it's a relatively simultaneous air-ground attack as we thought. Let's move now to
General, I'm sorry, we're going to go to Carl Cameron on some late-breaking developments that could be terrorist-related. So let's go to Carl Cameron in Washington. Carl?
Thanks, Neil. Well, Fox News has learned this exclusive information about ongoing Homeland Security efforts in the United States. Both U.S. and Mexican government authorities are currently searching for 6 alleged Iraqis who are currently said to be at large either in northern Mexico and or the southern United States. And in their possession is said to be, quote, toxic chemicals. One Homeland Security official involved in border security tells Fox News that the toxic chemicals apparently require some degree of temperature control, which could indicate that the toxic chemicals may be either radiational or potentially biological. Sources say the investigation has been underway now for 2 or 3 days in search of these 6 Iraqis. They allegedly tried to be smuggled into the United States via Mexico using what are referred to as coyotes, or human smugglers who specialize in smuggling illegal aliens from Mexico into the United States for a price. Sources say the information came from a variety of tips as well as undercover immigration work from people investigating these illegal smuggling rings. And until such time as they find the 6 Iraqis at large, they will not be able to tell the credibility of the tips or the information. It is potentially a very serious circumstance, and the government is treating it as such, they say. The investigation has been underway now for a couple of days. Much of the additional details considered classified. Information is scant at this point, but we can confirm that a joint investigation is underway with both U.S. and Mexican authorities seeking 6 Iraqis at large, either in northern Mexico or the United States, and said to have in their possession, quote, toxic chemicals requiring temperature control, which could mean either radiological or biological materials. We'll keep you up to date on all the details as this investigation unfolds, Neil. Alarming information in the context of what's happening overseas.
All right, Carl Cameron, thank you very much. Talking about terror and terror-related fears, well, I want to pass along to you this item from the Associated Press. Northwest Airlines, citing concerns over travel, Iraq, what have you, is going to be laying off 4,900 employees. This, of course, on the heels of 3 major U.S. carriers that are now officially in or entertaining bankruptcy. But Northwest announcing that it's laying off 4,900 employees, citing the Persian Gulf crisis. We're going to go to, who do we have available for us? Okay, I think we're going to go back to General Paul Vallely. Oh, I apologize. We're going to go to Chris Klein now, who is in northern Iraq, I believe. Chris, what's the latest there?
Neil, I'm calling meters away from Kirkuk, a location even closer than that from an
Okay, we're apparently having some problems with Chris, but we will be going back to him. In the meantime, the fellow I first rudely interrupted, General Paul Vallely, in Washington again on the next stage of this campaign. General, where do we go?
Neil, great question. I think as a result of today, the command and control, there are no communications coming out of Baghdad to the outlying units in Kirkuk or down south. So we, for all intents and purposes here, have destroyed their command and control capability. So where we go next now, Neil, is continued shock and awe, other targets that were on that target list of some 7,000 targets. And so with that, if you look at what happened today, taking out the presidential palace, and what I'd like to do is go to the flyover, the Fox flyover of the presidential palace that was taken out today. Let's roll that. There we go. Now, as those stealth bombers came in, Neil, they would roll down into the attack area, drop their munitions, pull up, and get out of there. I think you'll see more of these presidential palaces, almost some 100 being taken out, particularly up at Tikrit, which is Saddam's hometown. So some of the things you can see happening, a breakdown more of the units that are outside of Baghdad, and then closing into Baghdad sometime within the next 2 days.
General, are you surprised we're not seeing much in terms of opposition from the Guard or anyone else for that matter? You know, sporadic, opposition here and there, but certainly nothing considerable, and certainly nothing of the aerial sort.
Well, remember, Neil, in the last couple of weeks, intelligence indicated that he had pulled his main units back to Baghdad.
Right, right.
He was going to fight from the boundaries and the borders and the crossroads of Baghdad. The units that have been put out have been ragtag, not well trained, very demoralized, and those are the ones that are giving up now. But as we close in on Baghdad, we may see more defense than we thought. But on the other hand, with all the psychological operations we're doing, we may see that Special Republican Guard really break down very quickly and give up as well. So that's the best case scenario. The fight now is towards Baghdad and the fall of the regime within Baghdad within the next 48 hours.
All right, General Paul Vallely, thank you very much. I want to go to the USS Kitty Hawk right now, where you'll find our James Furlong. James, what's the latest there?
Well, the first wave of attack aircraft from the USS Kitty Hawk has left. I understand that they have been supporting US and British Marines on the ground around Basra. They've also been supporting American Army units near the Iraqi towns of Khalil and Nazreen. They've also been acting in support of Australian Special Forces who are on the ground in southern Iraq. They've also been Prowler aircraft. These are electronic warfare